And Jia Xiudong for more on China's stance and role in the crisis. He's a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome back to the broadcast.
Hi.
Tell us what you know about a diplomat from the DPRK who was actually in Beijing on Tuesday. We're hearing reports about this.
China has actually stated its position on the nuclear tests by the DPRK, and the DPRK knows very well China's position that it stands against nuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and opposes nuclear tests by the DPRK in violation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And certainly China will work with all the parties on the Korean Peninsula and in the region to try to deal with this latest crisis.
So the DPRK has received, international condemnation on this. China has clearly stated its position. What more can be done?
Well, first of all, we have to ask several questions. Are more sanctions from the United Nations Security Council and other countries, including the U.S., South Korea, the answer to resolving the crisis? Certainly, isolation sanctions alone will not, convince the DPRK to give up its nuclear program. Secondly, will more military deployment, more joint military exercises by the U.S. and South Korea, force the DPRK to give up its nuclear programs? Certainly not. And of course, the DPRK's nuclear tests violate the United Nations Security Council resolutions and should be punished with the sanctions. But the question is, there are other options which should be carried out by the parties, including the U.S., South Korea, China, Russia, and Japan.
Are you concerned that possibly next time it won't be a test?
Actually, so far, the DPRK is determined to move on with its nuclear program and ballistic missile programs. So the concern, of course, is that the latest and the past nuclear tests have shown that it is actually advancing with its nuclear capability and also the ability to develop ballistic missiles. Of course, the ambition now is to try to mount a nuclear warhead on its ballistic missile and to make sure that it can pose some threat to the South Korea, to the United States. So at this moment, we should consider another option, that is the resumption of six-party talks. Even at this heightened situation of crisis on the Korean Peninsula, the six-party process still proves and remains the only viable way to bring all the parties together to try to work on the denuclearization program, at the same time to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. I believe that actually, so far, the so-called strategic patience strategy adopted by President Obama has nearly failed, because in accordance with that strategy, the United States will, try to impose sanctions and pressure, including military pressure on the DPRK. At the same time, it will refuse to talk with the DPRK if the DPRK does not commit to denuclearization first. But a viable approach is that we should move on the two and parallel tracks. That is, denuclearization on the one hand, and the discussion of a peace treaty replacing the Armistice Agreement on the other hand. That is the two-track and parallel track in progress at the same time. Of course, it's very difficult to resume the six-party talks at this time, but it is still necessary for the parties to consider that option, because sanctions alone have proved that will not solve the nuclearization program issue on the Korean Peninsula.
Well, Jia Xiudong, we certainly appreciate your time and your thoughts on this very important issue. Thank you.